Brenner Jacobs hadn't expected to bleed before breakfast. But then again, he hadn't expected the alien exchange program to end with his arm nearly filleted open on the floor of Lab Sector 3 either. It was supposed to be a routine equipment calibration. The prototype terraforming unit, a bulky, humming slab of alloy and blinking lights, had been throwing off errors again. Brenner, as the human engineer liaison, was the only one who knew how to get the thing to stop beeping like a panicked heart monitor. His partner for the morning was T. Hill, a student from the Larry system, here on some cross-cultural scientific ambassador thing. T. Hill was tall, pale, lavender-skinned, with a face that looked like someone had designed it out of clay and then halfway through decided to go with glass instead. He was polite, intensely curious, and had the general energy of a nervous deer trying to take notes while surrounded by fireworks. "Brenner," T. Hill said, standing a little too close to the machinery. "Are you certain that is the—" Yeah, Brenner cut in, already crawling under the main panel with a flashlight clamped between his teeth. "Just need to realign the intake coil with the regulator." "Give me a sec." The humming deepened. A sharp electric crack whipped through the air. Brenner felt something punch his arm. No, slice it. Hard. He yelped, jerking backwards and smacking his head on the underside of the panel. The flashlight clattered to the floor. T. Hill crouched beside him instantly. "Brenner, what happened?" "Are you—" His sentence broke off as he looked at the human's arm. Brenner, still blinking stars out of his eyes, glanced down. The gash was deep. From his wrist nearly up to the elbow, a jagged line of red had opened, blood welling fast and hot. The edges of the wound were already puckering, raw and angry. The skin had peeled back in some places. It was definitely not the kind of thing you could walk off. "Oh wow," T. Hill said, voice going tight and high. "You are there, it is not sealing." "Why is it not sealing?" Brenner groaned, sitting up slowly and clutching his arm. "Because I'm not a gelatin-based life form with auto-clotting epidermis, T. Hill. Just hand me the first aid kit." T. Hill stood there, frozen, his eyes dark and glassy, fixed on the blood now dripping down Brenner's fingers. "T. Hill," Brenner hissed through clenched teeth. "First aid kit, wall cabinet." "Red Cross." T. Hill scrambled to his feet, knocking over a stool in the process, and dashed to the wall. By the time he returned with the kit, Brenner's shirt sleeve was soaked, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges. The cold sweat was kicking in. He opened the kit with one trembling hand, yanked out the gauze and antiseptic, and began wrapping. "I can assist," T. Hill said, still visibly shaken. "I studied human anatomy, but I did not realize your circulatory system was so pressurized." "Yeah," Brenner muttered. "Hearts are good at that." He winced as the antiseptic hit the wound. T. Hill flinched harder than he did. "Okay," Brenner said stiffly. "This'll hold for a bit, but I need to go to med." He tried to stand. His knees buckled. T. Hill caught him awkwardly under the shoulder. "You are losing too much hemofluid," T. Hill said. "I will carry you." "You'll what?" T. Hill didn't wait. He hoisted Brenner up, surprisingly strong for someone who always looked like he might snap in a stiff breeze, and started half carrying him down the corridor. Brenner didn't bother arguing. His head was spinning and every pulse in his arm felt like a hammer strike. Medbay was on the other side of the research center. By the time they got there, Brenner's lips were pale and his grip on consciousness was tenuous at best. The medic on duty, Dr. Yarrow, took one look at him and said, "What the hell happened?" "He was sliced by the terraforming unit," T. Hill said quickly. "His blood is escaping." Dr. Yarrow pulled him onto the table, snapping into motion. "Arm laceration deep, we need to flush and stitch. Get the scanner." Is it going to fall off?" T. Hill asked. Brenner groaned. "Not helping." "No," Dr. Yarrow said, "but he's got some nerve damage. We'll run a full scan to check for tendon involvement." The scan confirmed partial tearing in the forearm tendons but no bone damage. Still, the wound was deep enough to require internal stitching, and Brenner was given a local anesthetic before the procedure began. T. Hill watched the whole thing from the doorway, looking like he might faint. Why are you still here? Brenner asked, his voice hoarse. I wanted to learn, T. Hill said quietly, and I wanted to know if you would survive. I'll survive, Brenner grunted as the needle slid into his skin. Just not really in the mood to run laps right now. He was kept overnight for observation. The pain was manageable with medication, but movement in his hand was limited. Dr. Yarrow told him the tendons would take at least 6 weeks to fully heal, maybe longer if he pushed it too soon. T. Hill returned the next day still pale, still visibly shaken, but bearing something in his spindly hands. I read about human comfort rituals, he said, so I brought you this. He held out a lumpy object wrapped in cloth. Brenner unwrapped it slowly. It was a hand-carved replica of the terraforming unit made out of some kind of lightweight mineral. You made this? Yes, T. Hill said. As a symbol of our shared trauma. Brenner gave a short laugh, then winced as it jostled his bandaged arm. Thanks, T. Hill. I'll put it somewhere I can glare at it. Over the next few weeks, Brenner was restricted to light duty. No heavy lifting, no tool work with his right hand. He wore a brace and did daily exercises to regain strength. T. Hill, surprisingly, insisted on attending every physical therapy session. I need to understand how humans recover, he said. It is part of my thesis now. Your thesis is on planetary mineralogy. It has expanded. Brenner didn't argue. It was oddly comforting having T. Hill there, even if the alien asked far too many questions about pain thresholds and muscle fatigue. By week 3, Brenner could flex his fingers without burning pain. By week 5, he was able to hold a wrench again, though not for long. T. Hill documented everything obsessively, occasionally sketching diagrams of Brenner's arm movements. You know you're making me sound like a test subject, right? Brenner said one afternoon. You are not a subject, T. Hill said. You are a case study in improbable survival? Thanks. Very comforting. By week 7, Dr. Yarrow cleared him for partial field work. His strength was about 80% back, and the scar, though ugly, had sealed well. He wore a compression sleeve to support the muscles, but otherwise moved like his old self. T. Hill was still hovering. You're not going to faint again if I scrape my knee, are you? Brenner asked as they entered Lab Sector 3 again for a systems check. No, T. Hill said firmly. I have read extensively about human injuries. I am prepared. As if summoned by irony, the same terraforming unit let out a familiar crackle. Brenner stopped in his tracks. No, he said, you are not slicing me again. I will observe from a distance, T. Hill said, already backing toward the door. Brenner crouched by the machine, tools in hand, careful this time to power down the main conduit before reaching under the panel. Still, he hesitated, staring into the dark interior. T. Hill's voice came from behind him. You can do this. Brenner exhaled slowly, then reached in and turned the coil. No sparks, no slicing, just a quiet hum as the unit reset itself. He stood up, arm burning slightly from the effort. T. Hill clapped twice. You have conquered the machine. Brenner raised an eyebrow. Let's not go that far, but yeah, I guess I have. T. Hill fell into step beside him as they walked out of the lab. Next time, T. Hill said thoughtfully, perhaps we should calibrate something that does not bleed people. Now that, Brenner said, is the smartest thing you've said all month. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor, one human and one alien, both forever changed by a single blood-soaked morning in a lab. Brenner sat stiffly on the edge of the observation deck railing, his good hand wrapped around a cup of synth coffee that tasted faintly like burnt moss. Below, the rocky plains of Virelin 3 stretched in every direction, wind scoured and pale green under the planet's twin suns. He hadn't meant to wander this far, but once the brace came off and he was cleared for minor off-station activity, the urge to get away from recycled air and auto-sanitizing floors had been overwhelming. T. Hill stood behind him, absolutely motionless. The Ilari didn't seem to blink much when they were thinking, and Brenner had learned to just let the silence hang until something got said. I have revised my assumptions, T. Hill said at last. That sounds ominous. No. Just updated. He stepped closer, his long fingers clasped behind his back in what Brenner had learned was a gesture of deep consideration. I reviewed the footage from the injury event. You watched the video, Brenner frowned. Why? I needed to understand the moment you chose to proceed despite risk indicators. You moved your hand into the coil chamber even after the conduit showed unstable capacitance. I didn't see the capacitance alert. The alert was orange, not red. Brenner stared at him. You're telling me you watched me nearly sever my own arm because I ignored an orange light? T. Hill nodded solemnly. I have added a new category to my cross-species risk matrix. The entry is labeled, Human Reluctance to Heed Intermediate Warnings. Brenner took a long sip of the moss-flavored coffee. That's fair. I also recalibrated my understanding of pain endurance thresholds. Your facial expression during the injury did not align with the expected levels of distress. It hurt, a lot. But your primary vocalization was a single expletive followed by a request for medical equipment. Yeah, that's pretty standard. T. Hill tilted his head. You were actively hemorrhaging. I was also actively annoyed. They stood there in the wind for a while. The ridge below them was dotted with low sensor pylons, their antennae twitching slightly as the breeze hit them. I have a theory, T. Hill said. May I test it? I don't love the way you said that. I will not touch your arm. Go on then. T. Hill reached into the satchel slung across his body and pulled out a small, flat device with a screen that shimmered in a slightly nauseating way if you looked at it too long. This will simulate mild tissue trauma. I need to observe your autonomic responses to compare with Eilari equivalents. You're asking if you can zap me. Only a small amount. Brenner sighed and held out his uninjured hand. Just don't tell Yarrow. The device clicked once. A brief, sharp tingle shot through his palm like the aftershock of a bee sting that hadn't quite committed. He flinched. That's it? Yes. T. Hill was already frowning at the readings. Your stress hormone levels are elevated but not proportionally. This confirms my suspicion that human pain thresholds vary wildly depending on context. Context being, you believed the injury was your fault. Therefore, you did not panic. If I had caused it, I hypothesize your reaction would have been more aggressive. Brenner snorted. You think I'd punch you? No, I think you would have used sarcasm as a defensive mechanism. After a long pause, Brenner shrugged. Still fair. A buzz came from T. Hill's wrist communicator. He tapped it, glanced at the message, and blinked rapidly 3 times in succession. Which, Brenner had learned, was the Eilari equivalent of mild alarm. I must attend a procedural ethics seminar. It is mandatory for all exchange scholars who witnessed a Category 4 biological event involving a host species. Brenner raised an eyebrow. You mean my arm? Yes. Your arm has complicated several of our insurance clauses. Glad to be of service. T. Hill hesitated. You are certain you do not require assistance returning to the station? I'm fine. Fine in the human sense, or in the sense where you are about to collapse and refuse to admit it. I'm not bleeding. That's our metric today. T. Hill gave what might have been a bow or possibly a stretch, then turned and made his way down the gravel path, light-footed as ever. Brenner stayed a while longer, watching the pylons flicker faintly. His hand still ached sometimes, mostly in the mornings, and he'd caught himself flexing it unconsciously when he was thinking. The rehab exercises were tedious, but anything was better than sitting in isolation with nothing but the sound of his own blood rushing. Later that evening, he found a packet on his bunk, an envelope made from some kind of translucent fiber. Inside was a note printed in the looping Eilari script and a thin strip of flexible mesh. He brought it straight to Yarrow. It's a neuromuscular sleeve, the medic said after scanning it. Stimulates microcontractions in the tendons to accelerate healing. Where'd you get it? T. Hill, I think, left it without saying anything. Yarrow frowned. It's not standard station issue. Should I not use it? Yarrow ran another scan. No contraindications. Actually, this is good. Really good. The tech's a few years ahead of what we've got here. Just don't let it get wet. Back in his quarters, Brenner wrapped the mesh around his forearm. It adhered on contact, adjusting itself to the contours of his skin with a faint hum. Within seconds, a light tingling spread under the surface like tiny gears winding in reverse. The next morning, the stiffness was gone. Over the following days, he found himself moving more easily, gripping tools without hesitation, lifting heavier things without the telltale burning along the scar line. T-Hill didn't mention the sleeve, and Brenner didn't bring it up. But something had shifted between them, some quiet understanding that didn't need to be named. One afternoon, they were assigned to inspect an atmospheric relay on the outer perimeter. The terrain was rocky and uneven, with gullies that cut deep into the surface like old scars. T-Hill offered him a climbing rope, which Brenner waved off. "I'm not going to fall." I was not concerned about that. They reached the relay station just before dusk. The unit was tilted slightly, likely from a recent tremor, and the sensor housing was cracked. Brenner crouched to inspect it. "You got your diagnostic module." T-Hill handed it over wordlessly. As he worked, Brenner noticed T-Hill was watching him again, not the equipment, not the readings, but his hands. The way he moved, the way he didn't hesitate. "You expecting me to snap a tendon mid-wrench?" "No." "I was analyzing your grip restoration. It is nearly symmetrical now." "Yeah, that sleeve you gave me helped more than I expected." T-Hill looked up sharply. "You knew it was from me. You're not subtle." I attempted to be. "Well, you failed." They finished the inspection just as the first stars began to flicker overhead, pale blue against the darkening sky. T-Hill packed up the tools, his motions unusually quiet. "You know," Brenner said as they began the hike back, "I've worked with a lot of engineers. None of them ever ran a stress analysis on my personality. You are singular in your contradictions. That's flattering. It is not intended to be." But it is not unflattering. They reached the ridge as the wind picked up. T-Hill paused, looking out over the plains. "I have considered extending my exchange term." Brenner blinked. "Why?" "To continue my research." "And to observe further anomalies." "You mean humans?" "I mean you." The words hung there for a moment, heavier than they should have been. Brenner looked away. "Well, don't expect me to bleed again for your thesis." T-Hill's glassy eyes reflected the twin moons now rising overhead. "That is unlikely, but I have learned not to make predictions where you are concerned." They walked the rest of the way in silence, not awkward, not tense, just the kind of quiet that settles when something has shifted and neither of you needs to press into the change too hard. Brenner pressed his thumb against the diagnostic console, watching the screen flicker as it scanned his biometrics. The interface beeped once clearance accepted, and the door to the auxiliary tech workshop slid open with a hiss. He stepped inside, flexing his arm out of habit. The brace was long gone, but the sensation of tightness still lingered when he overextended, like his tendons remembered the damage even if the skin didn't. The room was cluttered, not messy, just overpopulated. Two different tool sets lay half disassembled on the workbench, and an open maintenance drone was sprawled across the floor like someone had started fixing it, then wandered off mid-task. The lighting was dimmer than the main labs, and the recycled air carried the faint scent of ozone and solder. T-Hill stood near the far wall, shoulders hunched slightly, surrounded by a semicircle of other exchange students. None of them were human. A few wore their translation harnesses visibly, blinking green as they processed hushed conversations in real time. One of them, a short, squat being with a head like a polished stone, tapped a pad with a stubby digit and looked up as Brenner entered. T-Hill turned. "You're early. Didn't have much else to do, and someone borrowed my soldering kit without asking." "That was for academic purposes." "I left a note. You etched it into the wall. That is our cultural method for urgent messages." Brenner leaned against one of the mounted tool racks. "So what is this, some kind of interspecies book club?" "It's a comparative resilience study." We're presenting findings on post-trauma adaptation in species with non-regenerative tissue systems. T. Hill gestured to the others. They've each compiled data points from their host environments. I was asked to include your case. You're calling it a case now, it was peer-reviewed. Brenner crossed his arms. What exactly did you tell them? That you sustained a traumatic injury during a standard operation, received only local intervention, and resumed functionality within weeks. That makes me sound like a malfunctioning blender. The polished stone alien stepped forward. Its translator buzzed faintly before speaking. Are you the one who refused biomechanical augmentation after the tendon breach? Brenner blinked. I didn't refuse, I wasn't offered any. You declined synthetic fusion. You allowed the structures to regrow naturally. Yeah, that's what people do. What else was I supposed to do? Request neural overlay, another voice offered. This one came from a tall, translucent being whose internal organs pulsed softly in rhythm near its chest. Or segmental replication. You chose inefficient restoration. Brenner looked at T. Hill. You told them I healed inefficiently? I told them you healed biologically. That was the anomaly. I didn't realize I was competing with people who grow new arms, the translucent being tilted slightly. We do not grow new arms. We extrude temporary appendages during regeneration. Comforting. T. Hill cleared his throat, a sound that resembled a flute being stepped on. They are not judging. They are attempting to understand. Brenner sighed and stepped closer to the circle. Fine. What do you want to know? The polished stone one tapped its pad again. Did you experience psychological destabilization during the recovery phase? I was annoyed. That count. Was your annoyance directed at the injury or at the surrounding entities? Mostly at the machine. Some at T. Hill. A little at myself. T. Hill nodded. He was consistent in his emotional targets. The translucent alien leaned in, its voice slightly slower. Did you require isolation? No. Did you consume nutrient compounds to accelerate protein synthesis? I had protein bars. They taste like drywall. The being turned to T. Hill. Is drywall an earth delicacy? It is a construction material. The polished stone one looked up again. Your species does not dissolve bone splinters post-trauma. How did you avoid internal obstruction? There weren't any splinters. That's statistically improbable. I got lucky then. T. Hill interjected. He had a linear tear, no fragmentation. The group fell into a short, contemplative silence. Brenner glanced around, trying to gauge whether they were confused, impressed, or just recalibrating their expectations. The translucent one spoke again. Your pain signals did not override function. I wouldn't say that. I had painkillers, neural dampeners. No, just medication. Pills? The being paused. You ingested your treatment, Brenner nodded. Yeah, that's how it works. Several of the aliens exchanged glances. T. Hill stepped forward slightly. I attempted to explain that humans medicate through gastrointestinal delivery, but it was dismissed as inefficient. Brenner scratched the back of his neck. You're telling me it's weird to take pills? Ingesting chemical agents without direct neural interface is considered primitive in most systems, the polished stone one said. It is not an insult. Sure feels like one. T. Hill turned to him. They are reacting to your recovery method. It lacks external integration. Because it works. For you. The group shifted again, this time parting slightly as if to give him more space. Brenner wasn't sure if it was respect or caution. The translucent one moved forward. I have one final query. Go ahead. When your tissue was compromised, why did you not vocalize a distress call? Brenner hesitated. You mean call for help? No, emit a sound that would signal pain to your surrounding kin group. I said something. Swore, probably. That was not sufficient volume for heard response. Brenner raised an eyebrow. You're asking why I didn't scream? Yes, he shrugged. Didn't seem useful. The being leaned back. Curious. T. Hill stepped closer to him. You have now answered all of their questions. Do I get a certificate? No, but they've recorded your responses for comparative analysis. Great. Immortalized as the guy who didn't scream and eats drywall, the group began dispersing one by one. The polished stone alien gave a short nod before exiting. The translucent one lingered a moment, then turned and followed the others without another word. Brenner sat on the edge of the workbench, exhaling slowly. That was exhausting. T. Hill sat across from him, folding his long limbs neatly. You did well. They think I'm a relic. They think you are statistically anomalous. Better. There was a pause. T. Hill adjusted the sleeve of his uniform. I did not ask you before, when you were recovering. Were you angry with me? Brenner leaned back, looking up at the tool rack above them. No, not really. Maybe a little at first, but you didn't slice my arm. I failed to prevent it. You warned me. I ignored you. That's on me. I assumed humans would react more visibly to injury. I was unprepared. You and me both. Another pause. T. Hill's gaze drifted to the spot on the floor where they'd stood weeks before, running diagnostics. If the situation had been reversed. Would you have helped me? Course I would have. Even with no prior experience in Ilari physiology, I'd have figured something out, or at least tried. T. Hill nodded once. Then we are balanced. Brenner stood. You want to grab something to eat. And no offense, but not from the Ilari food module. That stuff smells like melted crayon. I have adjusted to the Earth options, T. Hill said, rising to his feet. I find the concept of sandwich structurally elegant. Stick with me, I'll show you the least disappointing one. They stepped out into the corridor, side by side. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and somewhere down the hall, a maintenance drone whirred to life. Normal station sounds. Not dramatic, not dangerous. But still, Brenner glanced down at his arm as they walked. No pain. No tightness, just a thin line where the skin had sealed. I've been called a lot of things, he said casually. But I think statistical anomaly might be the weirdest. T. Hill gave a slight tilt of his head. It is meant with admiration. I'll take it. And with that, they rounded the corner, the conversation trailing behind them like footprints in dust, faint but real.